With the Edge of Fate came a reworking of how melee damage functions, and one of the major highlights is the streamlining of how glaive melees work in your builds. Bungie changed some key damage multipliers and updated a few exotics, including Winter's Guile, upping its melee damage buff to an insane 400%, which also applies to your glaives. Now, there's a lot of different melees and glaive options, so I did my best to do some testing to break down what the numbers might look like. I did all my testing in the shooting range, mostly against knights and wizards, so consider these numbers to be purely rough and comparative, which I'll talk about more later. Here's a table showing my testing, which has everything divided by buffs and the melee stat I was using. So starting at base melee with under 100 stat, it comes in at 162 damage. Warlord's Sigil times 5, which is the buff from Winter's Guile, brings in that promised 400% increase for a damage of 811. At 200 stat, with a 30% increase to melee damage on top, the base melee goes up to 209 and the max stack is 1041. Now, 1000 damage isn't necessarily too crazy, although it's pretty high for just a regular old melee, and it gets really interesting when you look at something like Excalibur or Winterbite. At 200 stat with max Warlord Sigil, Vex is dealing 1,458 each hit, and Winterbite is dealing 2,445 each melee. This is nuts since you can easily get 2 full glaive combos out before your buff expires, and from my testing, the final hit in a glaive combo does an additional 78% damage, which would bring the full stack Winterbite combo to a ridiculous 9,242 damage. If you're spamming your melee button, a full combo only takes 1.5 seconds before you're already on to the next one, which would mean the DPS is approximately 6,161. For a baseline comparison on the test dummy, since I tested against non-boss targets, Thunderlord did 76,601 damage over about 33 seconds to empty the mag, for a DPS of 2,321. Glaive melees also count as kinetic damage, so they synergize with TechSec armor, build transcendence, and from what I found in my testing, glaive melee damage is also influenced by your weapon stat as well as your melee stat, which you can see here. This is where it's important to remember these numbers are meant to be rough and comparative, since there's a lot of different buffs and percentages going on, and this is in no way meant to be a cover-all video. I would say, however, to note that cranking your melee stat and your weapon stat will increase your glaive melee damage, although I'm not sure right now if this is intentional, so try to get as high as you can on melee first, with weapons second. Warlord Sigil also applies to your powered melees, which brings in some crazy numbers. As you can see, there's a few that pull out pretty far ahead, most notably the Void Melee Pocket Singularity and the Solar Melee Incinerator Snap. Now, I only tested the melees available on Prismatic, again, just to compare some rough numbers. I'd have to assume these percentages and increases apply to Slide Lightning as well, but unfortunately, it's really hard to test since damage numbers don't seem to appear correctly for it, and the damage numbers on the board are a bit unreliable since any damage dealt beyond an enemy's health bar isn't included. It is important to note though that Slide Lightning absolutely does count as a melee, so it does get buffed by Winter's Guile and can easily get you to max stacks when you slide into a crowd. If you're running Feed the Void, it brings Devour into the mix as well, which you can maintain with your glaive melees for maximum survivability and uptime of Warlord Sigil. Now, I'm really not much of a numbers guy in this game. I know how buffs and percentages and everything works and how to test them, but I mostly just focus on cranking the damage as much as I can, and I sort of feel it out and see how the build slays out. With that in mind, this build is absolutely buck wild. There's almost nothing you'll come across aside from unstunned champions or bosses that can even withstand a max combo or two from Winterbite. With TechSec Blast in the mix as well as Devour, you can disorient the crowd around you and heal yourself as you completely clean house. Since you can also rely so heavily on your glaive melee, it's easy to save up Slide Lightning charges, so whenever you see a crowd you need to clear fast, you can just swap off your glaive, slide in, and dust everything. Ammo economy is also awesome, since melees contribute a pretty great amount of ammo progress, and you hardly even need to use any since you'll mostly be focusing on melee kills. Winterbite also stuns overloads, so you can run a triple champion stun build if you use Mint Retrograde and a hand cannon or sidearm, not including whatever subclass stuns you might be running. If you're on Prismatic, you can throw in Song of Flame as your super, so if you need higher damage resist to tear through a crowd, you can pop it and just start slugging it. This build's an absolute blast and it deals an absurd amount of damage. It's extremely easy to use as well, since all you need to focus on is maintaining Devour and beating anyone you can find to a pulp. I'll left a dim link in the description below if you want to try it out for yourself, which I highly recommend. Thank you very much for tuning in, and subscribe to the channel to keep an eye out for more in the future.